Welcome to the Fat Monk Podcast. Tales of meeting an unorthodox Taoist and his friends amongst the mountains and waters of China. Written by Xiaoyao and read by Nick Dent.
Chapter 15. Trigrams, Heaven and Earth. I wound my way up the hillside, trying to guess how long it had been. The ache in my legs said a long time. Was the fat monk still fat? Was he still at the Taoist monastery I was climbing toward? Around me, the spring flowers were just becoming fragrant, and the joy of growing life lifted my spirits. So did the thought of my old friend up ahead. Things had not been easy in the intervening years. Much had happened, and life had pared away many of my illusions. Like polishing iron to make a mirror, I had said to the fat monk once. In your case, more like polishing a stone, he replied, but his chuckle had softened the observation. Now I thought he might well have been right. Much as I had tried to put all he had suggested into practice, I could not feel that I had made any progress at all. My passion still raged out of control, and my ego seemed to force me into the most ridiculous situation. Halfway up, I paused to catch my breath. What if the monastery was closed, as it had been during the Cultural Revolution? The place had been boarded up during that time, chilled and cold. But soon after resuming my climb, I turned a corner and found the little pool fed by a tiny waterfall. Goldfish glinted in the morning sun as they darted through the limpid depths. A few steps more, and the uplifting fragrance of incense. I stood before the massive double wooden gate, looking at its demon-faced door knockers, and hesitated. Suddenly, I was not so sure I could face the mirror that had always been held up to me. The mirror that seemed to show some deformed and depraved monster from which I recoiled in horror. I looked back at the path down the hill. Then, on impulse, I lifted my hand and, grasping the knocker, gave a resolute bang on the gate. I could hear the sound echo through the woods behind me and die away. After a long time, the huge wooden doors gave a creak and slowly opened a crack. The old gatekeeper looked up at me around the wooden edge. His old wrinkled face was something time had dragged downward like melting slag. But when he saw me, the melting seemed to reverse for a moment. You could not call it a smile, really, but rather a momentary pause in an otherwise inexorable avalanche. My friend, the fat monk, Fatty, is he still here? The old gatekeeper closed his eyes, shrugged, and gestured toward the rear of the compound. My heart was pounding as I approached the old familiar doorway of the library. I found myself holding my breath. I looked through the opening and saw, not my fat friend, but a young, thin monk straightening books and dusting. My chest deflated with a sigh of disappointment. The young monk's Taoist habit was proper, almost severe, and the face he turned toward me held no hint of welcome. "Is Fatty still here?" I stammered. He frowned and blew out an audible breath. His look around at the books said as plain as words, "Can't you see I'm busy?" "I don't know any Fatty," he said. "He must have moved on, moved to another monastery. He used to be in charge of the library here. It was not that many years ago." The young monk's face changed. His eyes darted here and there. Finally, he looked at me again. "You need to speak to the abbot," he said. His chin trembled. "Take me to him," I said. The firmness in my voice surprised me. He shook his head, lifting his hands in refusal. I grabbed his elbow and pushed him out the door, then pointed him toward the rear of the compound. "Go," I ordered. With promptings and proddings from behind, he led me through the maze of passageways until we climbed the steps leading to the veranda that rose high above the compound. When we knocked on the door of the abbot's room, his thin arm was shaking in my grasp, and when a deep voice roared, "Who?" from within, he broke away and ran. The sound of his feet clattering down the steps left me facing the wooden door alone and a bit shaken. Was there a new abbot? There must be, and he must be truly fierce. But there was no other way. To find my answers, I must face. The door creaked open. Outlined in light from behind, a dark and immense figure stood there, silent, waiting. Then the figure spoke. Oh my God. After an hour spent catching up on all the old news, I had learned that the fat monk was now the acting abbot, the old abbot having retired into seclusion for a time on a mountain in the next province. Congratulations, I said. Ha, that's a laugh. Making me acting abbot is his idea of a punishment, he said with a wry face. Why the terror tactics, I asked. He grinned. Several reasons, as usual, he said. One, I get left alone to attend to more important things than who stole whose laundry. Two, they have a chance to learn how much their inner state is influenced by the action of those around them, and to decide if they really do want their feelings blown about like a leaf in the wind. What's the alternative, I asked. I was really puzzled. Surely you could not control how people act around you. Why, you create a gap, he said. You make an interval between the impact of the outside influence and your reaction to it. In that interval, you have a moment to decide your response. He looked hard at me. Response, mind you, not reaction. My mind was invaded by large letters. Mind the gap. I shook my head to clear it. The letters remained. I realized that I saw them every day at the train station in my own city. Now I remembered how the fat monk had told me. The teaching is all around us, informing us silently if we only pay attention. And that is the thing about feelings, he finished saying. What is? I'd been thinking and not listening. He looked at me as if I was dim-witted. Like I said, even though we call them feelings, we hardly ever take time and really feel them. If we did, they would convey to us a tremendous amount of useful information. There was silence for a while, then the Taoist got up to make some tea. I looked out through the windows of the room onto the cultivated fields on the hillside at the rear of the monastery, where I had once labored with a mattock, rooting out the previous year's husks and remnants. Now the hillside was newly hoed, ready for spring plantings. The smell of fresh earth came through the window. I thought about the girl Xiaojing, but asked about Shijie, the fat monk's friend and teacher of a Taoist group that operated in the guise of a herbal cuisine restaurant. He said the restaurant was closed and her group of students disbanded. I was shocked. Why? What happened? He looked at me, surprised. What do you mean, what happened? I mean, why did she disband the group? Was something wrong? He frowned. No, not at all. The job was done. Those students had learned what they needed. Certain faculties had been activated. Certain sets of skills embodied. After that, they scattered. He gave a satisfied nod. I shook my head. It seems so strange. In my experience, once a successful group was established, it would go on until it broke apart from dissent or dissatisfaction. I chewed my lower lip in thought. Perhaps this way of deliberate termination was better. I told the fat monk what I'd been thinking. Indubitably better, he said. Don't forget, this is not a social club we are talking about. This is a specially designed teaching group. Its membership is carefully selected. like a musical ensemble, each personality bringing a certain quality, a specific resonance that, when fed with a current of, here he hesitated, let's just say energy, will respond with a type of vibration. No, that's not quite right. Aya, don't you know how hard these things are to express accurately? You really have to feel it for yourself. Language cannot handle the subtleties. That's why symbols are used so often. Ah, the perfect segue, the opening I was waiting for. I was there to ask about symbols. I had reached a brick wall in my own investigation. The most problematic was the abstruse line system of the I Ching, the Book of Changes. Unfortunately, that very line system was the basis for the deepest expression of Taoist alchemy, the books Can Tong Xi, the unification of the three, and Wu Zhen Pian, understanding reality. Without a personal understanding of the trigrams and hexagrams of the I Ching, one was limited to relying on the explanations of others. The I Ching is the basis, he said. It's all in there, but of course in highly symbolic language. You mean it's not a manual of divination? Well, anything can be used for divination, he replied, but that is not its only purpose, or even its prime purpose. You think the Confucians locked it into that role? Yes, but for good reason. What do you mean? You need to look at history, he said. Zhao burned all... Who? I asked. You know, Qin Huang, the first emperor, who united all of China around 220 BC. He ordered the burning of all books except those about divination, medicine, and farming. So you mean that... Yes. By making the I Ching a, quote, divination classic, the absolutely crucial information it held regarding the subtle differentiations of energetic quality was saved for posterity. But how did they know in advance to do this? They probably used divination. I could not tell if he was joking or not. The light from the window was behind him. Anyway, something else had occurred to me. That Qin Huang was a bad man, totally evil, I said. The cruelty he showed in the building of the Great Wall, and he buried scholars alive. He certainly was capable of brutal acts, said the fat monk, but the long-term consequences of those acts are interesting to contemplate. Like what? Well, for example, one thing he did, again very brutal, that few seem to give him credit for, was to threaten with death or dismemberment anyone who used any other character system but the one that he had established. He looked at me pensively. You do know that there were 6 other states that he conquered, and they each had their own writing systems, right? I hadn't. But so what? Think about it. By that one act, he unified the language, well, the written language anyway, of the whole region. Without that apparently brutal command, China could well be like Europe now, many different countries, each with a different language, each acting without common purpose. Getting back to symbols, I said, you've talked a bit about the hexagrams of the I Ching and more about the trigrams, but I still can't quite get how they work. You have to do some thinking on your own, he replied. Then he laughed at the look of dismay on my face. But I might make it easier. What's the problem? I think it goes right back to basics, why the trigrams are made up the way they are, with combinations of solid and broken lines. Let's go back even further, he said. You have a single solid line, yang, a broken line, yin. Okay, why? Yang is the celestial. It is one single thing, an indivisible essence, hence a solid line. The breakaway from that single essence is earth, yin, and yin earth is the 10,000 things, all separate. Earth can be divided, plowed, for example. hence a broken line. It made sense. Don't forget, in creating the system of symbols, we are looking for a way to describe the qualities of a situation. So we need more than just one or two, or yes or no, or on or off. We need to add some complexity. So we'll add another solid or broken line above the basic yin or yang line, which is our foundation. He took out some paper and, wetting a brush and ink, drew the following: 4 symbols, 2 yin lines, a yin and a yang line, a yang and a yin line, and 2 yang lines. Now we start to have a combination of qualities: pure yang on the right, pure yin on the left, and 2 types of mixture in between. Pure yang is called old yang, and pure yin is old yin. And why? I interrupted. Sounds ageist to me. Why should old be pure? The fat monk looked at me with a pained expression on his face. This is why you don't make much progress, he said. You get stuck on irrelevancies. Irrelevant? I got fired up. What could be more relevant than the struggle to free society from the oligarchy of the age, to allow youth the freedom to... Hey, what are you doing? He was packing up his paper and brushes. I'm going out on inspection. I'll be back when you have freed yourself from the tyranny of the masses. The way he said it ran together the words, so it sounded like them asses, and I knew, for we had discussed this before, that he was referring to the numerous petty selves within each of us that could swing into action at any time and take over the running of an individual mind. Wait, I said, I'll go with you. That would defeat the purpose, don't you think? He said, but his tone was not unkind. But if you wish... He was walking out the door as he said this, and I hurried to catch up with him. First stop, the kitchen. Why was I not surprised? When we got to the dining hall, it had that feeling of abandonment that normally busy places acquire when they are empty. At the far end of the hall, a young novice monk, wielding a mop, had his back to us. The fat monk called out a question in the local dialect, and the young monk gestured toward the rear. We found Cook sitting at a small desk working on a list. Abbot, he said, standing up, and he smiled broadly when he saw me and grasped my hand, saying, Xiaoyao, what wind blew you here? I gave him my news and then said I had come to ask about the I Ching. His eyes lit up. Cook loves the I Ching, the fat monk said. That is one reason we came here first. He has a rare old set of yarrow stalks that he uses. They are very ling. Ling literally meant a soul, or more abstractly, that which can make the insubstantial substantial, but in this context meant highly efficacious in mysterious ways. Cook told me that he had studied with a famous fortune teller when he was young, and that while there were the usual methods of handling people and managing their responses that go with that profession, there was also an indisputable sense of accuracy in the hexagrams that resulted from manipulation of the stalks. Why don't you come by my room later tonight, and I'll do a reading for you? I agreed, and we left the kitchen to continue the inspection. After traipsing all over the monastery for what seemed like hours, making observations and corrections here and there, the fat monk led me up the path to the hill that looked over the lake, where we had a welcome rest, assuming a cross-legged position on the ground. He refused to talk, sitting silently and very still. Whenever I would try to engage him in conversation, he would point with his chin outward toward the lake, or point with his finger upward toward the sky and put it to his lips. Be silent. After a long while, I settled. The sky moved slowly above us in soundless progression. Between the immensity of the earth below us and the grandeur of the sky above, I felt at once part from both, painfully divorced at some essential level. At that moment, he turned to me and said, Now, what was your objection? I frowned. I could not remember specifically what we'd been arguing about. Anyway, whatever it had been, it was not my only difficulty with the symbolism of the I Ching. Well, for one thing, I said, some of the attributions don't add up for me. The prime yang trigram, Qián, 3 solid lines, symbolizes the heavens and the celestial, but it is described as jiangang, strong and hard. How can that empty space in the sky be strong or hard? And what you were saying earlier about the use of a solid line to mean yang and a broken line to mean yin. Now I'm not so sure. 3 solid lines to mean heaven is confusing, I think. It should be changed. A yin line should be solid, and the yin trigram, kun, should be changed to have all solid lines. He raised his eyebrows. Oh, you think it should be changed, do you? Then he smiled and raised both hands palm up to his shoulder level. Hey, we might be able to work something out. I mean, a solid line has meant yang for, I don't know, only a mere 25 centuries or so. He chuckled. Let me call a few of my friends. But that's the problem, I said, ignoring the sarcasm. A solid line, I think, should mean earth. I patted the earth. Solid, see? And huge, so much bigger than the sky, whereas the sky is empty. I punched my fist up into the open air a couple of times. How can the sky be strong and hard? That should be the broken line. I sat back, a bit smug. My logic was irrefutable. To my satisfaction, he sat there nodding his head. Then he looked at me and said, Yes, you are right. It is indeed the basic problem. Zhu Yuanji has a commentary on the Cantong Shi. I've mentioned it before, I think, where he uses the concept of host and guest to describe how original essence is taken over by life and confuses us. He shut his eyes for a moment, then quoted, In the realm of pre-manifestation, Qián, which is essence, is the host, while kun, which is life, is the guest. When the middle line of each trigram changes to make li and kan, unavoidably the guest becomes the host, and the host turns into the guest. If only people knew that all they have to do is invert kan and li, suddenly the original Qián and kun reappear. The essence, which is Qián, becomes the host as of old, while the life, that is kun, returns to its place as guest. He opened his eyes and said, I hope I got that right. Anyway, he goes on to say that the heart-mind is originally the essence host, while the body, life, is the guest that has assumed the host's position until we rectify things. We take the guest as the master and get turned around. He rested his elbow on his knee and pointed a finger at me. And right here, that is exactly what you are doing, taking the broken multitude as the complete whole, the weak as the powerful, the tiny as the big. Weak? Tiny, I said, with some heat in my voice. I had to defend myself. Pointing around me at the distant mountains and the huge lake in between, I said, How can you call this tiny? He looked at me, a tiny smile playing around his lips. Someone once told me that a man's capacity is the same as his breadth of vision. You said just now that the earth is stronger and bigger than the sky. He paused. How big are the heavens? I knew from bitter experience that he could turn that deceptively simple question into a devastating rebuttal. So I calmed my breathing, shut my eyes, and thought for a moment. Suddenly, my mind expanded. I could see what he meant. I had been thinking only of sky as that thin bit of earth atmosphere, not beyond. My concept of the heavens ballooned outward until the earth seemed tiny, fragile, a mere point in the overwhelming majesty of the rotating solar system, which itself was a tiny group in a circling galaxy, which itself. I found I had my eyes squeezed tightly closed. I opened them and sighed. The two characters that had puzzled me were clear. Jiangang. The strength of Qián was unquestionable in the face of its immensity. Compared to that, Kun, earth, was tiny. And yet, without Kun, without a receptive place to work, some potential, some substance or ground to work on, all that power had no ability to configure anything. And of course, earth meant all of the innumerable worlds of all the universes. That was the workshop of Qián. I nodded. Okay, I said grudgingly. I see what you mean about the unity and strength of Yang, and even the pliability and receptiveness of Yin. Good, he said, but I want you to see this. He pointed outwards with his chin. And fix the image in your mind. I'd been totally focused on my argument and had not noticed the lengthening of the shadows as the sun slid down the sky. The west was an inferno of color as the setting sun hung just above the horizon. Then the fat monk turned his head and looked east. A full moon was lifting over the hills. The heavens are fixed above, he said, for the purposes of this image, and the earth is fixed below. Thus, the stage is set. Also, you should see that what moves on this stage, what moves between heaven and earth, is the sun and the moon, the two extreme symbols of yin and yang. Qián, Kun, Li, and Kan. All changes happen on this vast stage, set between heaven, Qián, and earth, Kun. Notice how everything is a mixture of yin and yang, heaven and earth. This in-between areas where all this mixing takes place, the stage for the changes. The changes are shown by the two trigrams Li and Kan. You could say that they are the functioning of heaven and earth. What? I wrinkled my brow. The function of a stage is to make evident what might otherwise remain hidden. He scratched his nose, frowned, then brightened. It's like a play. Without a stage, the play would remain hidden in the mind of the playwright. He looked at me. You get it? Yes. But he could hear the hesitation in my voice. Here, the presentations of pre-manifestation, Xiantian, are being made evident, the principles of Yang above and Yin below, and their interaction in between. He made an arc with his hand encompassing the whole scene. Here, before us, we can see multi-phase transformations of darkness and light set between softness and hardness. Original principle. That is why I wanted to fix in your mind that image of the sun and moon hanging suspended between earth and heaven. It's all there. And, of course, he tapped his chest, in here. I bowed my head in thought. After a while I nodded and struggled to my feet, stiff after an hour or more on the ground. In one incredible motion, the fat monk seemed to stand straight up from a cross-leg position and took my arm to steady me. You all right? He asked with a concerned tone. Yes, I said, shaking off his arm. Let me show you a quick way to buck up your energy, he said. An old Taoist trick. He took a series of quick steps on his heels around the top of the hill. It looked incredibly ridiculous. Try it. Actually, come on, he gestured around at the empty hillside. There's no one here to laugh at you. I took a few steps on my heels. I didn't notice much difference. Now do this, he said. He took a step with his left foot, then struck the back of his calf muscle forcefully with the top of his right foot, then did the same on the other side. This strikes the point Changshan to stimulate the whole Taiyang channel, he said. You sure you won't paralyze yourself? I said. He grinned. We both remembered the demonstration of Kung Fu point paralysis he had given me on our second meeting. I tried to imitate his movements. It did seem to give me a little more energy, although it could have just been my imagination. Just before we left the hillside, I looked back at the panorama that had been spread out before us. The sun was almost gone now, and the moon was rising resplendent. It reminded me of what he had said regarding the changeability of yin. Yin is the multitude. Moon was the perfect symbol. The sun was always the same, rising in the east and setting in the west every day, even as it shifted along the horizon during the different seasons. But the moon changed constantly. I laughed at myself. Constant changes. The moon's changes were indeed constant, predictable. To be continued.
Thank you for listening to the Fat Monk podcast, produced by Ben Thomas with music by Flora Carbo. Please like and subscribe and go to the show notes for links and further content. If you'd like to become a material supporter of the podcast, click on the coffee button at the bottom of the show notes.